Here's another one. Substances. Like alcohol, booze, weed, whatever. They always tell you that they're bad and you'll get addicted to them if you even do them at all, ever. But addiction doesn't really work that way, and that's another thing that the media doesn't really cover. The other day I was walking to the liquor store, of course. I was talking with somebody there, and I was telling him all kinds of drunk stories and stuff, the usual. And eventually the conversation got to the point where he's like, at some point, it's like, been there, done that. And I look, and this guy's got a house, he's got a car, and he's got a wife or girlfriend. I'm not sure which, I didn't bother to ask, but it just shows you. It's not magic, it's when you're missing something in your life, a lot more likely to get addicted. It's not just fucking magic. But this all sidesteps the question, why are so many people getting addicted? Nobody wants to talk about why so many people are getting addicted, because then you'd question what's actually going on. Instead, it's far easier for them to just say, drugs are bad, okay? Like the stupid DARE program and all that. They don't actually talk about what systemic societal problems are actually leading to this. It used to be, can you take 5 years of shit for things to be okay? But now, as things have gotten worse, it's 20. Can you take 20, maybe even 40, maybe even just it all being shit before it gets better, or it just never gets better? And I don't know about you, but I don't think I can take 20. 5 might have been doable. To have the things that most people want in a regular life. A relationship, not having to work 50, 60 hours a week, not having to live with your parents for years and years, and being able to actually dorm at college and all that. But no, we don't get that really anymore. And here's some statistics that I saw for the United States in 2022. Is 28% of households are alone, just some person alone. 22% are married without children, and only, I think that's 21% are married with children. People are having less kids, and it's not really any surprise to see why. When living standards have gone down, even though they tell us that the free trade is supposed to make everything better. Look at the past 40 years. It's not gotten better. Wages have been stagnant, but the standard of living's fallen because the cost of living has risen. Here's another one. 52% of 18 to 34-year-olds are still living with parents. That's fucking awful. I've been looking into this van living movement, because for me, I don't think I can do repeat the same fucking week every week until I retire and then waiting to die. I just can't do it. Especially if I have to do it alone, which it's looking like I'm going to have to, and I know a lot of you are thinking about that too. And listen, it's not your fault. It's a countrywide issue. It's maybe even a worldwide issue. But they want to paint it as if it's this individual problem. I don't see any point in having that regular life if I have to do it alone. Let's talk about the latest shit that's happening. You've heard about the Roe v. Wade reversal. Now, let me just say this. If you oppose abortion rights in their entirety, you're just retarded. That's it. A ball of fucking cells is not a person. And you people who want to bitch about the late-term abortions, 98% of abortions are not late-term abortions. They're first, maybe early, second, or something trimester. Okay? And I don't want to hear about, but when the sperm and the egg meet together, it's imbued with the soul. Ooh. Well, you can throw that Bible in the fucking trash, or Quran, or whatever the fuck it is, because we might as well start talking about fucking chakras if you're going to start bringing that into here. Let's keep into the realm of what actually exists instead of spirit mumbo-jumbo. And all this is going to do is put more strain on women. You think this is going to actually fix anything? If anything, it's going to make the loneliness epidemic even worse. Consequences for an accident could end up being stuck with, especially if you can't fucking afford it, kid. As I was mentioning in the statistics earlier, a lot of people can't afford it. You really think that this is going to be great for the children, either that grow up in strained households, into this world of shit? And we have these stupid heartbeat bills that are based on crap science that these aren't real heartbeats. These are just like cells pulsating. The heart isn't even really developed by the 2-week or whatever week mark that they're talking about. This is just really fucking stupid. You know, don't get bogged down in these fucking retarded arguments, okay? We should just treat this issue as the same way we treat slavery. If you support it, you're fucking retarded and you should be slapped across the face. End of discussion. We don't debate this. This is a settled issue. This is exactly how this should be too. You have all these fucking boomer dipshits pushing for this in the courts. You have all these fucking boomer dipshits, I mean, mostly in the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party has been spineless fucking cowards and done jack shit about it either, so let's not pretend like the fucking DNC is all roses and fucking flowers. Now, a lot of misery in our society is really just simply because of de-industrialization and the combined forces of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Now, they're responsible for the loneliness epidemic because deindustrialization led to wage stagnation while real costs of living have grown over those past 40 years. That stupid free trade and globalization bullshit made us worse off when they kept telling us it would make us better off, and they kept saying it has made us better off. But it hasn't. Just look around. Ask real fucking people about this. The service economy. Jobs don't produce real value either. This is why. They won't explain this to you, of course. And they bring out those stupid Harvard, stupid MIT, or whatever economists that wave around a bunch of fancy degrees and show their fucking cherry-picked data and act like everything's better, everything's fine, it's your fault if it's not for you. But once you get out of that stupid bubble, you realize that that we're all not doing well, except for a tiny handful of people that profited dramatically off of selling out our national interest to China. Again, these service economy jobs don't produce any real value. Think about it this way. You have 1,000 mustache on dog apps versus 1,000 vodka bottles comparison. So there's a startup cost to both of these, of course. But the cost of copying the useless mustache on dog app 1,000 times is basically zilch, nothing. But the cost of producing those 1,000 vodka bottles, that employs people. People have to make glass, they have to turn the glass into bottles, they have to grow crops, and they have to ferment that, and they have to then distill that down into vodka. And let's say in this scenario that both of these companies somehow net 10 million in sales. With the vodka company, what happens is a higher percentage of that goes to paying people who work in producing the vodka and the bottling the vodka and growing the shit to make the vodka, and the distillery workers who maintain the distillery machines. But with the mustache on dog app, what happens is basically all of that money goes to a tiny handful of people, because because there's basically only a startup cost and there's no production cost to the app after that. You can just copy it endlessly with basically zero cost. So that 10 million in the case of that app company, that went to like 5 people. But the 10 million in the case of the vodka company, that went to a lot more people. That actually created real value too, because it took work to make all of that vodka and bottle it and make all the glass and turn that glass into bottles. Now don't get bogged down in these stupid Wall Street and Silicon Valley backed bullshit with their fancy Harvard degrees by Big Money Douchebag Institute, okay? What'll happen is, even if we sit there and do the time to debunk it, they'll just produce some more bullshit data and more bullshit studies, and then we'll have to debunk that, and it'll be an endless cycle, and we'll waste all our time and never actually get anything done. And meanwhile, the regular public who's watching this, they're just going to get bored of it. Or worse, they might just assume that since the other side has the fancy degrees and stuff, that they're right, and then go back home and be depressed and not realize that this is a systemic issue. Then they'll think it's their fault, like these bullshitters keep telling us. And now look at all the top employers by state. It's all shit like Amazon, Walmart, Kroger. These companies don't actually produce any real value. All they do is they move shit around. Those products were produced in China or in India. All those cashiers and stuff do is they move the product. You see, you examine chairs, for instance. The people making the chairs are actually adding value because they're turning raw wood and nails into chairs. so that work has actually added value to the economy. But a cashier who rings up the chair for you when you buy it, that job's just necessary from, say, Walmart's point of view, because the chairs aren't really useful to them if they don't have anybody to sell them to you, but them bringing up the chair doesn't add any actual value to it in the concrete sense, only in the abstract sense at best. And that's not to say you should shit on people who do these jobs, because someone has to do them, but we can't have an economy grow and only be made up of jobs like this. It just isn't working, as we've seen. Now, I'm going to run through the case for banning dating apps. Now, people will complain and say, oh, but that's authoritarian, you can't do that. Come on, what's wrong with dating apps? If people want to use them, what's the problem? Well, let me get to the fucking problem. You see, politicians just don't want to spend money on producing society at all. Now, that should be no surprise, like the sky's fucking blue. So, when people complain about there not being any social spaces, about the ways de-industrialization has hurt socialization, how young adults are stuck living with parents and stuck dispersed, deluded in boomervilles, that makes it basically impossible for a lot of people to actually get out there, so to speak, and meet people. That would actually cost taxpayer money to fix. It would be well worth it, because it would drastically improve society, and I'm sure you would agree as well if you're dealing with these problems. And it would cause our economy to grow again in some aspects, because at least we'd have people making more kids. But politicians don't want to spend the money, because those are going to be decades later. Their terms are going to be well up. They'll probably be long dead before that even happens, with how old some of them are. So they'll just say, oh, what, you're lonely, you should just get on dating apps. Come on, it worked for these people. So they'll just use it as an excuse. So banning them basically just eliminates that excuse, and on top of that, it reveals the extent of the problem to those few people that the dating apps are working for, and those people who they were slightly working for. And it'll force them to come together with us to actually find real solutions to these problems that actually, address the real problem, instead of just fixing it for a small minority. And this loneliness, it has real effect. The combined forces of Silicon Valley and Wall Street kill. Is it not murder when people die from the stress of long working hours, isolation, and rising living costs? Tell me, is it not murder when these people die from that? Because it's been proven that stress shortens your lifespan, isolation and loneliness shorten your lifespan, and seeing no future for yourself shortens your lifespan. The difference between someone who's never been married and the difference between someone who has is the equivalent of them smoking 2 packs a day. Yeah, let that sink in. And we have a new force coming from Silicon Valley, a new sinister force, the AI companions. Because people will kind of begin to blur the lines between real human relationship and machine bullshit, and they'll reveal secrets that they wouldn't normally to people, and that they wouldn't normally even say freely on the internet to these companions. They're listening in on that. They're gathering information, building up a profile of you. They're going to be able to know way more about you than you realize. In Silicon Valley, let's not forget, it's already been proven that accelerometer data can be used to identify with over 95% accuracy. You see, they did this study where they monitored the accelerometer data from people's phones, which, by the way, a lot of phones, most apps, they don't even need to request permission to get this data. They can just get it without you even knowing. They can identify people, and this was a few years ago even, so it's probably even better than that now. 95% accuracy. Just from your walking patterns. That's basically what they're measuring with the accelerometer data. And that's only what they can do with that. Imagine what they can do with all this data that they're getting from AI companions and combine that with social media. Now, to fight against the forces of Silicon Valley, any mass movement that would start up would be cut down before it ever gained enough momentum to actually do anything. You see, everybody's got cell phones on them. They can track you. They can figure out who you are by social media posts, accelerometer data, cameras that are unexposed, and microphones that are on. So they can break up crowds by diverting traffic, maybe delaying stoplights to stop crowds from forming, intentionally causing traffic jams, And any crowds that get past this, any mass movement that gets past this, they can identify you by your cell phones. So if we actually started to get some real momentum into opposing Silicon Valley, and not just saying that we oppose it, but, actually opposing it, if we actually started to do this, they'd be able to shut us down long before they could arrest us by identifying us with the cell phones, or just shut us out of the rest of society completely. This is why any mass movement, any actual resistance to Silicon Valley would need to first involve chopping down cell phone towers. Even if you leave your cell phone at home, smash it, whatever you do, there's going to be other people around with cell phones. They're going to be waving them around, taking selfies, the young Zoomers and all that. And even if they're not waving them around, their microphones are still listening, regardless of whether they're using the cell phone or it's just resting in their pockets. Their microphones are still listening. Their location services are almost certainly on, and even if they aren't, they can still turn them on externally somehow. Of course, we know that. So you could be identified by someone else's cell phone, too. That's why in order to completely shut down this de facto surveillance state that's in place, that's building, we would need to start chopping down cell phone towers. And I've been thinking about this. The conspiracy theory that 5G causes cancer. It's obviously bullshit, but maybe it's not so bad for people to believe that 5G causes cancer, at least the people gullible enough to believe it. Maybe when you see a comment like that, give it a thumbs up or something, encourage them, because then they'll do our work for us. And fundamentally, this isolation also serves the interests of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. When people get together and talk, they realize that what they were led to believe were individual problems are actually systemic problems. They realize that it's not just them who's doing poorly, it's everybody, every real person. It's not just them who's lonely, it's millions who are. When we actually come together, when we break through this isolation by starting mass movements, as more people join, they realize that these are systemic problems, that they've been lied to all their life through mass media, through social media, and through ads that show us all these supposed regular families, and they have their nice fancy new car, and they go to their 3-story house with all fancy new brushed stainless steel appliances. And people who don't know that many people think that that's what average people have, that maybe it's just them or their neighborhood that's doing bad, and that it's their fault. But when people come together, they'll break through that. They'll realize that these are all systemic problems. They're affecting everybody. It's because our economy has been fucked over by de-industrialization. So then the question becomes, after we chop down the cell phone towers, which we could, of course, rebuild after we've eliminated the threat of Silicon Valley and Wall Street, the question then becomes, how are we going to communicate with each other without that? Well, because we can't rely on the internet either, of course. You see, I'm going to propose for you the case for radio, particularly shortwave. I know it may seem kind of old school, but unlike social media, there is no algorithm distorting the airwaves. Whatever you pick up around you is whatever you pick up around you. There's no algorithm's going to sort it that's going to put the stuff that the big money douchebag institute wants you to hear about and downplay and put down at the bottom, or even just not show you the stuff that they don't want you to hear. If you can pick it up, you can listen to it. Now, since we can't rely on phones, that makes basically radio about the only way. Now, the FCC uses these shit regulations to steal the airwaves that rightfully belong to us, forcing us to use phones and social media. And the FCC puts in their bullshit licensing requirements, and you can't say this or that. And then the only thing they give amateur radios is, okay, you can talk between a bunch of boomers, but you can't actually start up a talk show, and you can't do this or that, and you need this class of license, and with this one you can only do Morse code or some shit. And that's how they get you. Why the hell does the FCC need to moderate a bunch of airwaves? Like, look at shortwave. A lot of these frequencies are completely unused that were originally allocated for regular broadcasting. And in some states, they make it a fucking felony. Like what? It's as bad as murder to put some radio waves into the air? That's fucking retarded. It doesn't hurt anybody, so what's the harm in doing it? Why? Because some kid is going to, for some reason, be interested in shortwave and he'll hear somebody say fuck on the radio? That's a stupid thing. They can already go on the internet and hear that anyway. There was this story I read about, or something like that. It was a pirate radio station. I believe they operated out of a van or something. They were called FUCC. The FCC couldn't get them because every time they'd get a notice or track them down, they'd just move, or they'd move before they'd even got to them because they're operating out of a van. Free the fucking airwaves. And shortwave amplitude modulated broadcasts are really easy to transmit and receive, even while moving, as I've just told you. I don't remember whether FUCC, what they operated on, but amplitude modulation, AM, you think AM is an AM radio, but that's just one band. AM can be really applied to just about any radio waves that you transmit. AM, amplitude modulation, just means that the intensity of the wave varies. The sound information is encoded into the variation in how big the wave is, how the amplitude of the wave. And of course, if we're going to use radio as our method of communication, we would need to encode a lot of our information in a way that the outsiders who are working against us can't figure it out. We'd need to develop some kind of cipher or something. And now it can't be too complicated. We can't be like all this fucking, you have to know JavaScript, C++, and all this other code gibberish to do it. It'd have to be something that you could teach, like, at least a decent portion of us. You know, you could have two groups. There's a radio, each has a radio transmitter and receiver, two groups of us distances away, and you have a couple people in each of those groups who know how to operate the radios and who know how to encode and decode messages. It doesn't have to be everybody who knows how to do this in the movement. Just has to be enough people where groups can communicate. Now you're going to need to learn a fair bit about radio. We're not going to go that deep into the theory. You don't have to do all that, but just learn about a few of the basic antennas, learn a little bit about shortwave at least. A really simple antenna is called an inverted V antenna. You can look up a calculator for any frequency you want on the internet and just type it in and it'll give you the length you can use. Just get some coax cable, and you can salvage some coax connectors from old electronics. Just go to a Goodwill or any thrift store and look around. Old tube TVs probably have a standard coax connector on the back. You can take those out. And you can literally make the antenna out of speaker wire, which you can buy for under $10 from like a Menards or a Walmart. It doesn't have to be sophisticated or fancy in any way. You don't need to go out and buy your own equipment too. You can even make your own transmitters fairly easily if you just have a base level of electronic skills. And I don't mean electronic skills as in computer skills, I mean actually soldering real components together. Now, of course, there's some things you would have to do. You obviously don't want to be broadcasting over military and aircraft bands, because that's a quick way to get yourself canned. And you don't want to be broadcasting over ham bands either, because you'll probably piss a lot of them off, and they'll probably turn you in, and they'll probably hear everything you're saying too. FM transmitters are much harder to make. FM stands for frequency modulation. The data is encoded by the frequency of the wave changing a bit around a center point. Now this is obviously much more likely to be Cubs. This is the type of radio that basically everybody has still. And you wouldn't want to do like regular AM, because it rates at like half a megahertz up to like 1.7 megahertz or so. And that requires gigantic antennas. Like a quarter wave antenna on these can be like 300 feet tall. It's not the type of thing that's easy to set up. And shortwave frequencies, like some of the lower frequencies, the antennas can still be pretty big, but once you get into like 10, 20 megahertz, the antennas get to be something that you can easily set up inside your backyard or anything, or even inside your house. Although you wouldn't want to be stationary with these things for the most part. And you can even transmit images by SSTV, slow scan television signals, over these. Now, as the name suggests, it's a slow scan. It takes like a minute to 2-3 minutes to actually transmit an image, and the images are pretty low quality, but you take what you can get with this. And if you wanted to actually do anything to make it easier to broadcast on radio frequencies freely without licensing and other bullshit, what you could do, but it probably won't do anything, let's be real, because they never keep their promises. Maybe there's a politician who's campaigning on fucking over the FCC or defunding them. That's who you should vote for. Unless all their other positions are batshit insane. And it'd be easy to convince people of defunding the FCC, because what do pirate radio transmissions do to the average person? Absolutely nothing. The average person doesn't really give a shit. It would be pretty easy to convince your boomer family of defunding the FCC. Just tell it to them on the basis it's a waste of taxpayer money to be dumping money into the FCC.